The age-old question, of course, is which came first. And in the good stead of my friend Clark Props, who cares? as long as it came by rail. And we are going to look at poultry cars. And this is a photo of a live poultry transportation car. I want to give a big thanks to Kristen Dumler, the lady that you mentioned just a few minutes ago, who gave the presentation 2 years ago at Naperville. Ray Breyer, who's got a wonderful photo collection that he shared with her, and she in turn has shared with me. And then I've shared the stuff I found with her, and we have built quite a collection of stuff on this subject. So the slides with words are basically taken directly from her presentation. So some of you have heard this before, but live poultry shipments began with just putting crates in, or putting live birds in crates and loading them in box cars or stacking them up on flat cars, and that didn't work very well. Basically because of illness and weight loss, the poultry just wasn't in very good shape when it got to market. Dress poultry, of course, is a very popular item today, and it has refrigerator cars came about the ice birds, dress poultry ice birds became popular, but they were only popular in certain circles of the population. But they often, if the cars got warm and the middle of the car would typically get warm, the birds, the dress poultry was spoiled, unfit. So some people in 1884, William Jenkins and James Streeter, came up with an early design for a poultry car. But we'll start with this first.
The local poultry merchant transfers the bird to his crate and batteries in order that he may show it where. Size, condition, and finish are all factors in determining the price paid to the farmer. As with eggs, live poultry is produced at great distances from the consumer centers. The same swift transportation is required to get the birds to market. Specially designed railroad cars are utilized for transporting the live birds to market. These cars are provided with built-in cages, removable feed and water troughs. The sides are open so the ventilation is good. In fact, the railroad men call these cars chicken pulls, and an attendant travels with each car, feeding and watering at regular intervals. It's proof that the birds are kept happy that they frequently show a gain in weight at the end of the trip. The majority of these birds go into the kosher trade, which demands that poultry be killed according to the ancient Jewish ritual. On arrival at the terminal markets, birds are transferred from the cars to cooks for transportation to the slaughterhouse and the live poultry market. Regulations in most cities require that the birds be inspected for health.
Sorry about that. That was my error. But that gave you a little bit of a flavor of what we're going to look at tonight. So here is a different variation of a poultry car. This really looks like a large bird cage on wheels. I'm assuming that they stacked the crates inside the car, and it had just the wire framing sides, as you can see, for the ventilation. The difficulty with this type and style of car was the farmers wanted their crates back, their chicken crates back, and they often did not get them back. And so that created a problem with a lot of the farmers. So as I said, Jenkins and Streeter designed a car that allowed the care for the birds, loading and unloading into coops that were built into the car so that the farmer could get his chicken coops or his crates back right away. They went through several different design flaws. This was an early version where the crates were opened and accessible from the outside, ventilated. There's some, and it had feed troughs, water troughs, as you can see here, that were built into it. So they had difficulties with this design, and so they kept refining it and refining it. And then they came up with a design where there was a center aisle down the car, and the coops were accessible from the aisle for loading, unloading of birds. There also was a place for them to, a stateroom, they called it. This was the accommodations for the attendant who rode the car. They had a sink, stove, and bunk, allowing him to travel with the birds. And he made sure they arrived healthy, and they arrived heavier than when they were put in the car, because he had feed bunk underneath the stateroom and a water tank above the stateroom, for which he would use to mix up the mash that was put into those feeding troughs, and also water the birds. So here's here's a little bit better idea of the design. The central stateroom, you had the 7 tiers of coops stacked on either side of that center aisle. Here you can see the bunker underneath for the feed, and there was a trap door in this stateroom where he could access that. And then there would be a water tank up here in the ceiling or the roof of the car. So here is a drawing, early drawing that was published in Railway Age. Gives you an idea. If you wanted to scratch build one of these, I've got a very large version of this drawing that I could send you. Here's the ends. The ends also had doors that slid to the side, ventilation, so that whole center aisleway could be opened to allow air to flow through. See the note up here about the tank, galvanized tank up above, which was for the water in the center. And then, so this is some of the design. That was a live poultry company. Another company that came up with a similar idea was the Continental Live Poultry Company. They offered what was a larger car. The live poultry was a 36-foot car. This Continental Live Poultry, I think, was almost 60 feet. It was a much larger car. It had room for 7,000 birds versus about 4,000 on the previous car that we looked at. Michigan Central was a big sponsor behind this car design, but it just didn't go anywhere. You can see it was designed for crates to be stacked up on the floor. It only lasted a couple of years. Another company that came into being about the turn of the century was the American Live Poultry Company. They began in 1909. They had a patent from Burgett for a car that closed by closing these vents, almost like you would a radiator vent on a RS1. So the slats and louvers. The company only lasted 2 years. So here's an end shot of that particular car. But the need for birds, the short video clip mentioned something about the kosher market, and it was the Jewish trade that really pushed the live poultry car manufacturing and shipment, because the kosher trade demanded a live bird that would be killed and slaughtered in a certain way. And so the typical Jewish housewife wanted to go down and pick out a live bird that she could take home and have it killed the proper way, and etc. So they continued developing cars that would move live birds. In 1890, they had 56 cars. In 1903, they had grown to 825 cars. And then they kept adding to that as people wanted to ship their birds. Yeah, what's interesting about these cars is not only did they have a number, but each car was also given an individual name. And the names typically were places or types of birds, or they might be named after a person. And they were typically running at the head end of a fast freight to get into the large metropolitan areas where there were large Jewish populations. In 1910, they adopted a steel underframe designed of car and other safety features. In 1909, another company tried to get in, Lemac Carrier Company. They had 150 cars, built it up to 400, but they were sued for patent infringement, and they vanished in the early 20s. Some railroads built their own cars or purchased them. They typically followed the live poultry design. Some of those railroads were Michigan Central, Lehigh Valley, Southern, Lackawanna, Norfolk, and Western, et cetera, that records have been found. Here is a photo of the Lehigh Valley poultry car. And as you can see, it's basically it looks like a stock car with chicken wire on the inside. So they probably stacked crates up inside and then had to make sure that those chicken crates got returned back to the local farmers. Here's a drawing from the Southern Railway archives. showing their design for their poultry car. And it looks very similar to the live poultry transit car. This is a Canadian Pacific car. This is a later design. This car was, I think, built in the 30s. It's basically it's got steel ends, steel construction here, which most of these cars were pretty much of a wood construction with the steel underframe. So, but it still has the arch bar trucks. So here is there were a few small companies around. Live Poultry was probably the largest owner of poultry cars, but this was Pacific Wholesale Poultry. They were in Petaluma, California, and basically they fed the San Francisco Bay Area markets with chickens. These were be moved from Petaluma down to the ferries and then cross over the San Francisco Bay into San Francisco proper. And then
Hey,
they only had a handful of cars, but as you can see, it looks very similar to the live poultry. So,
hey, Doug, this is Roger.
Yes.
Underneath that last picture, underneath the walkway, what was that?
This here?
No, the next, go forward.
This one?
Yeah, underneath the walkway up above. What was that underneath the walkway there?
That's ventilation. I'll get
Oh,
to
is that what them were?
I'll get to that
Oh,
in a
okay.
later photo. So, but good question. Yes. So, let's see. The whole trade continued to grow. You know, there were 1,000 cars in 1914, over 2,000 by 1921. Several manufacturers building the cars. I think the ultimate number was a little over 3,000. We started getting the National Poultry Butter and Egg Bulletin that got published. There was a concern that there just weren't enough cars around. The USDA got involved, all kinds of things. Here's another little video. This is silent, so you'll just have to watch it. Here you can see them taking birds out of a crate and loading them into the built-in coops. So that's how it was done. And by the way, all those birds came in through the attendant's stateroom. So he shared his bedroom with every bird that was on that car. So just for your edification. Yeah, here by the late 20s, we're up to 2,800 birds. Then 1924, competition came in with the Palace Poultry Car Company. Their reporting marks were PPKX. And they had 251 cars, grew to 400. And then in 1926, they sold out to North American Car Corporation. And then North American came back in 1930 and they took over the Live Poultry Transit Company. So they ultimately, North American owned just about all the poultry cars that were running in the country, except for the few that were owned by railroads. And that was very few. So here is a photo of a Palace poultry car. Their design was a little bit different. A couple features I want to point out to is, as Roger noticed, the raised walkway, you've got, this was an open slat ventilation system underneath that running board. And then you had panels here that could be opened, and they had a mechanism where the attendant could open them from inside the car or from the end of the car. So he did not have to climb up on top. You also notice there's ladders, not only at the end of the car, but here on either side of the attendant stateroom and door. You can see that this door was slid open like a barn door, and there was essentially a screen door on the inside. So he could open that up for ventilation as well to air out his stateroom. You can see the chimney stack for his stove, which he used for heating and cooking. And you can see the bunker underneath where feed was stored. This is a really nice, clear photo of what these cars looked like. So, 1928, over 50% of all live poultry was moved by rail, but by 1940, that dropped to 27% because As we know, in the 30s, trucks and highways improved to such that a lot of the traffic went that direction, and a lot of dressed poultry went to refrigerator cars. If you were not Jewish, you didn't really care if you got a live bird or you got one that was already dressed by the market and you just took it home and put it in the oven. So that changed things. Of course, in the 29, the crash, North American. What's interesting is those who've been studying this, North American companies like Fruit Growers Express, Merchants Dispatch, et cetera, they still made money in the 30s because people still ate and they still bought food that had to be moved to where they lived. So anyway, and then towards the end of this period, they came up with a new design, which was a combination refrigerator car and poultry car. And this was for less than a carload of poultry. They could carry about 2,500 birds, and they have 730 cubic feet of space for the dressed poultry, eggs, butter, and other perishable goods that might be picked up on the routes. Here is a photo of a combination car. This photo is from 1928, came out of a Rock Island employee magazine that Roger Ward actually found for me. And this, I think, this was one of the earliest cars that we've seen of this particular design. Here is another one, the Speedy. You notice this one is called Sample. I don't know if that means it was a sample of what they were going to intend to build, or it was named after someone like, what was a Junior Sample, and what was that old West TV show? It doesn't matter. So anyway, you notice that this refrigerator car on one side, attendant's stateroom in the middle, and then poultry cages on the other side. So, and this the Speedy, this is the one that the Ambroid, if you go back way back in history, and I know there's a couple of ancient folks on this who do, they remember the Ambroid kits, and their combo car was the Speedy. So we started seeing a decline in the 30s. We had some others try to get into shipping and meeting livestock needs. There was one company came up with the reporting marks of HLSX, which was called for humane livestock shipping. And they created some cars. North American was cutting back, and they retired 1,000 cars from their fleet of about 3,000. We started seeing more and more of dressed poultry. And then it came down, dressed poultry was being shipped at 10-1 to over live. And the war increased live poultry shipments for a time, but it was pretty much coming to an end in the 40s. Here is that humane livestock car, HLSX number 1. This was a triple deck. The attendant stateroom was at the end of the car, not in the middle. And then this was their second car, which really looks like a livestock car that they just have loaded up with a bunch of chicken coops. This is HLSX2. I have no idea if there was ever a 3 or a 4. So this may have been the extent of the Humane Livestock Company. And these were modified, essentially modified stock cars, or they got modified back into hauling small animals because they just could not get the live poultry traffic that they thought they would. So the end, in 44, North American created the Poultry Transit Company, and they basically got rid of all their cars. They kept 124, which they soon retired. By 1947, the whole company was down to 237 cars from almost 3,000 less than 10 years earlier. So by 1950, only 15 cars remained. There's a little dispute as to when the last poultry car actually ran on rails. One, the Poultry Society says 1956. American Railroad says 1961. But anyway, if you're modeling anytime after World War II, the likelihood of needing a poultry car is pretty slim, unless you're in certain markets. So we're just going to look at some different photos of poultry cars. This is NHX was National Huckster Company. Huckster was those little trucks that traveled the back roads and sold groceries and things like that were called Huckster trucks. And I buried a guy a few years ago whose family ran one of those out of their grocery store in southern Iowa. But this was National Huckster, their car, number 6,000. Here is a car that was loaded up in Whitehall, Wisconsin. You see it stuffed full of birds. Here's another one, Chanticleer. This one has got a sign on it saying it's filled with live pigeons. when we start talking poultry, we're not talking just chickens or turkeys. We're talking any kind of fowl, chickens, turkeys, pigeons, ducks, etc. that were shipped in these cars. Primarily, it was chickens. Turkeys they found did not travel well in live confinement, so the turkey market quickly went to the dressed and frozen bird. But chickens were still shipped alive for a number of years. Here we can see, I forget, I think this might be Detroit. I can't remember where the photo's from, but look at all those chicken coops that have been stacked up there. So somebody's been filling a lot of chicken cars at this location, or they're anticipating the arrival of a train of chicken cars. So, and here we are. They're starting to load up. You can see they've got some coops there. They're taking them off the hand cart or baggage cart, getting ready to grab those birds and take them inside and put them into the coops there in the car. Here's another crate of chickens that someone's brought in, and all the guys standing around there waiting to grab. Here's yet another photo. This is down south somewhere. You can see all the chicken crates and coops that are laying there. Here we got all the farmers coming into town, and you can see a couple of poultry cars in the background. And I'll point out that if you are looking at historic photos from about 1900 up through the early 30s, and particularly at depots and freight houses, make sure you look in the background, because often you'll see a poultry car back there that first you just thought was a box car until you see the wire cage sides. And you realize that you've got a poultry car. And I've seen a lot of them just, oh, I was looking at the depot. I didn't even see what was behind it type of thing. So here we've got farmers brought his old Dobbin there with the wagon, and you can see they're grabbing the chickens by their legs out of the coops, and they're taking them inside to stuff them into those cages. So here's the same process somewhere else down south, it looks like. Here's a farmer's backed up his truck right there, and you can see once they get the chicken coop unloaded, they drop it on the ground, and then once he get all his chickens unloaded, he will pick up his coops and go on his way. And he will go on his way with money in his pocket, because he will be paid on the spot for his chickens. So here we see another activity. There's a Norfolk Western boxcar in the background. So this is probably in the Virginia region of the country. And here we can see how they actually carry those birds into the car. You just grab them by their legs, carried them into the attendant's stateroom, and then went down that aisle and found an empty cage that you could stick them in. So when you went to, if you were the attendant, you went to bed at night, you had to make sure you swept up all the feathers, etc., that might have gotten on your bunk. So here we got another car being loaded. You can see the empty crates there. And yet another one, Berkner Brothers. I think this was up in Wisconsin as well. These photos have come from all over, so I can't remember now. This is in down south North Carolina, I believe. Their first poultry shipment by the county in 1924. You can see these guys are pretty excited about having a market for their birds. They got the kids involved. They've been loading up birds. They're ready. And here's another photo from the same location and site. So here we got just a lot of people waiting for their picture to be taken. Somebody's written on the door here, Hastings P Company. So they obviously are buying chickens this day. They would run ads in the local newspapers. They would have live poultry car such and such in town on a given date. The farmers bring your chickens in. This is the rates we'll be paying, and they were paid by the pound. And there would usually be a scale there somewhere where they could weigh the coop or weigh the birds in some fashion, and they would get paid. And these were not just single carloads. You'd have whole trains of these cars sometimes. So, and the caretakers, we'll talk about the attendant or the caretakers. They were often hired by whatever company was running the cars, or someone who perhaps owned the car, and their job was they traveled with the car from the time it first started getting loaded until it got unloaded, and their job was to water and feed the birds, make sure they stayed healthy, to remove any diseased or dead birds and dispose of them. And they literally lived in this little attendant's car or attendant stateroom. As I said, they had a bunk, a stove, etc. So, and they were paid for the job, and then their bonus was they were allowed to collect all the eggs, and they could sell the eggs and pocket the egg money. So that was their bonus. And then if the car traveled any distance, depending on which company they were working for, they might get a coach ticket back home to ride the passenger train back home, and the car was returned empty. So, but that varied from company to company. Sometimes the attendant was, he got to the where the market was, and then he was on his own to get back home. So, yeah, this tells a little bit about what they do. Yeah, dead birds had to be removed. We'll move on. Here's what the attendant stateroom looked like. Nice, clean, tidy. Yep. And their life. There were certain rules regarding these cars. By the 1920s, one warden carman or attendant could serve up to 5 cars if there was a single owner of those cars in the same train. They would increase that to 2 and then 3. No women and no children were allowed. Return passage and reimbursement, if available, had to be completed in 60 days, but not all of them got that luxury. Mostly was Western roads that reimbursed. Those east of Chicago tended not to. Occasionally, a car might be shipped with a contract, a note that said no caretaker in charge. And there were what called caretaker cars. If you had a whole string of these cars, they might include a bunk car that these guys could actually go and sleep in, away from the noise and the smell. Here's a drawing from I can't remember the name of the car, but you can see it looks very similar to a caboose with several bunks, a table, and a stove for cooking meals. And they could move back and forth between the cars through that center aisle to get to this car. So similar to a drover's car for livestock movements. So just some more photos. This is where they're loading down in Gentry, Arkansas, which was still is a big chicken producing territory. This is a nice video about getting a permit for unloading poultry. Once they got examined, they were inspected by the USDA. So watch this process. That's the USDA guy. They did that to keep from the guys overfeeding them, kind of like the watered stock that rumors were about. So the attendant now has his permit. He can unload the birds wherever they at. Notice that this fellow apparently only has one arm. So this was a type of job that he could probably get. Also, if you notice the inspector, when he found the diseased bird, he did it. I can remember my grandmother doing the same thing, just wringing the neck of the chicken to kill it. And they just dropped it on the floor to be cleaned out later. So we don't want to start that again. We want to go to the next slide here. Just some more cars, variety of cars. This is another good quality photo of a car that was built in 1922. notice that we've got a poultry car here in the back up against this building, this Swift and Company. We think of Swift as a meat company, but they also handled a lot of poultry as well as cream and butter, etc. And most of the big meat slaughter operations also handle poultry. So here's a nice, two nice shots of the ends of the brake end and then the other end of the live poultry transit car. And you can see you get two doors on two levels here that can be slid back and forth to open or close. You can see the slats there for the ventilation. And then the doors, the lower door is a single piece and can be slid all the way so the attendant can walk, get out of the car or walk into the next car if he needs to. So just another shot. They were just nice, clean, well-kept cars. Here's what one looks like when it's either being rebuilt or under construction. They basically have got a steel frame. You then have the wood roof and the wire cages go on. The spacing and you'll notice I should have. I'm going to back up here for a moment. I want you to notice that this looks like a chain link type of fencing, and it is. But notice the gaps in between. Each of these coops had wood boards as a floor, and this gap was so the attendant could just take a small push broom type mechanism. He could just push all the droppings and stuff right out that gap and outside the car, and that's how he would clean it. And so that gave him access for doing that. So, oh, what do we got? Oh, the last known poultry car. There's one poultry car still in existence today. It's at the National Museum down in St. Louis. It's tucked in a back corner of one of their buildings that you can't get into. So it's really, you almost have to know somebody to get access to it anymore. It was a car that's what's being used basically as a chicken coop by a company called J.H. Brown. And they had it just parked on their siding for many, many years. And finally, when the owner of the company passed away, the new owners donated the car to the National Transportation Museum. And this is what the car looked like, oh, probably 4 or 5 years ago, sitting in their shed. And you can see, you know, the boards are all starting to warp and fall apart. From this, you can see the end doors are falling apart. This car is in pretty sad shape. Whether it will be restored or not is a good question mark because it would need a lot of care. But yeah, here you can see those slats for the floor in this gap. So you could take a small whisk broom of some sort or push broom and just sweep out each one of those cages that was built into that car. So, and here's the stateroom, and this is what the interior center aisle looks like. This car is in pretty sad shape because the roof, it looks like the roof is all fallen in. So here we can see we're probably getting stocked up. We got bags of feed here. He's up on top looking at the water supply. So he's probably just checking his supplies out. So we got a couple more shots of, oh, another film.
Into key terminals every day come millions of chickens for Mr. and Mrs. America. The poultry racketeers have a stranglehold on this $300 million industry. New York alone pays $8 billion tribute yearly to gangsters. That comes out of consumers' pockets. So federal and city officials declare war.
Yes, the government was at work. So anyway, it mentioned the New York City market. Here's a photo of the market in New York City, the poultry market. And they got 250 cars a week in New York City. And here, Roger, you can see where those ventilation doors are open. And anyone who was up on that running board, the brakeman, for example, had to be real careful that he didn't slip off and go down through those ventilation, because that was just wide open. It was just a wire mesh that would keep him from falling all the way through. So, but it figured 250 cars a week with 4,000 to 5,000 birds per car. That's a lot of chickens going in there every week. So it was a big market. Philadelphia, New York City, Boston, Washington, D.C., all had significant Jewish populations and all got a lot of birds that came up from the Virginia South, from the Midwest, and birds, well, there are records of poultry cars traveling as far as Texas to New York City. And it would take a week. So that attendant spent a week in that car with those birds. So here's another covering the Jewish poultry, Orthodox Jews in the kosher market. And this killing applied not just to chickens, but to all meat consumed in the Jewish kosher market. So the slaughterhouses would have these rabbis or shachats who had the proper blessed knife, etc. So they might sever the windpipe of the poultry, but if we're talking beef, they would slit their throat and bleed them to death. So that was but the kosher market was very big for whether poultry or any meat consumption. So and then the Jewish ladies could go to their wholesale market and get what they wanted for their family. I did that again. Sorry about that. The birds were protected in bad weather. Here you can see they're hanging a canvas. Now you see why there's two ladders on either side of the attendant's cage, so they had hooks up here at the top, and this was basically a piece of canvas that they hung to keep the birds out of the really bad weather. And I think I may have coming up a video to show how that was done. It's a very poor video. I apologize for that. You can see how they're just stretching the canvas up. Again, New York is the biggest poultry market. Here's the interior aisle of a poultry car that's nice and clean, ready for his. So you can see the each of the coops that are stacked up here. They went 7 high, and I think they were 5 or 6 deep on both sides of the attendants. So you had you could house a lot of birds in one of these. So here's an ad that this ad's from 1921, telling you that the poultry car will be in Gary. I think this was Gary, Indiana, on these 2 days. Highest prices, etc., and what they were interested in purchasing, the types of birds. So bring your poultry to the live poultry car in Gary and get your money. Car will be at the depot. Tell your neighbors. Here's another ad. This is from the North Carolina and Lincoln Town Freight Depot. And here's what they were going to pay for the different types of birds brought in. And then this was a little blurb out of a newspaper somewhere. It says a car of poultry ready to go belonging to the Table Rock Poultry Company was struck on each end by switch trains and badly wrecked on Saturday night. Many of the fowls were killed and others got away and had to be run down. So just the type of work that you did, right, Roger? So
I thought it was you. Somebody told me that was your first job when you was going to college, was taking care of one of them cars. Is that true?
So here's another ad that the Union Pacific ran all in the 1920s talking about how you could start a little poultry ranch with just a couple acres and you could make all kinds of money. Invest $1,000 and they get you set up. So here's the opportunities you've all been looking for. I know. And this was up in the Pacific Northwest, as Oregon, Washington area. So
I wish I'd have seen that before I took a job.
yeah. Greg, you muted me. So anyway, here's just another car loaded with all the different people who are helping. You know, this was another newspaper story. So, of course, trucks came into the poultry shipping business. They called it a poultry Pullman, an interesting trailer, and another later design, the chicken crates, coops just stacked to the gills there. Here's an early one where they're bringing birds into town, probably, or Spencer Poultry and Eggs. So they're maybe getting ready to take them up to the depot to ship them off somewhere. Here's one, Mac somebody wholesale poultry eggs out of Pennsylvania, and the attendant is having to climb up the stake side here to see what's going on. He obviously had a problem. So now let's get into the models a little bit. As I mentioned, the Ambroid and Northeast scale models both produced what the Livesay poultry car and the Speedy poultry reefer car. These were done in wood in the 50s. You can still find them once in a while on eBay or other places. Neither is prototypical. They're just kind of a caricature. Mainline models produced a wood kit as well, but it had, you know, no detail, less detailed than the Ambroid kit. There's articles in Model Railroader and other publications that included drawings. So here is a photo of an Ambroid kit that someone has assembled. They never painted it, except for it looks like they did paint silver on the wire mesh. But this is the combination car. You can see it does have the ventilation over here and just the raised supports for the running board, the two ladders, and of course the refrigerator car side. There has been one brass model imported. Overland did this for a Paulus poultry car. And then Bachmann and Tyco had a tri-level stock car that it's modeled after those humane livestock cars. And of course, many are familiar with the Lionel. They had two variations of their poultry car. Here is the Overland brass model. It was done in HO and in O. A very nice car in many ways, but there's still some discrepancies from the prototype. These cars were brought in about 1984. If you find one on eBay, be prepared to pay anywhere from about $500 to $800 a piece. They're scarce as hen's teeth, you might say. So you see them on eBay, but boy, you're going to pay for them. So here's the Bachmann's humane livestock car, which when you look at the prototype photo, it's not too far off, somewhat acceptable. Here's the Lionel one. It just had a printed plastic sides and a light on the interior that would light up. So Bachmann came out, they announced a new poultry car last year, and I got really excited to see what they were doing, and this is what they offered. And all they've done is taken one of their steel box cars, replaced the sides with a plastic insert that looks like a poultry car insert. They didn't even remove the box car, or the box car sliding door. They just put a paint job and a smaller door over the top of it. The running board is the standard running board, just raised up a little bit, no ventilation vents, steel ends, steel roof, not prototypical whatsoever. Plus they're selling it for $49.95. So in four different paint schemes. I wouldn't waste my money on that one. So just heads up on that. But if you want to build a model, you're pretty much going to be scratch building or something. There's some details about, you know, the coop area. Floors are made of tongue and groove, removable for cleaning, adjustable to accommodate larger poultry such as turkeys. So you could remove the floor between two levels of cages and create a larger opening. The narrow walkway is about 24 to 30 inches wide, depending on who designed the car. Stateroom had a bunk, stove, sink, provided access to the water tank. They could you could open up the doors on the inside to walk through and have ventilation, access to the state. I've covered a lot of that. This is something Ron sent me a link to, a company that is attempting to do a 3D printed poultry car. And there's if you want the URL, there it is at the bottom. I believe these are an HO. It could be N. I can't remember now, but you can see he's trying to get the cage supports and stuff, and he's got, looks like that wedding veil mesh for the exterior, but you don't have the individual slats. And his overall 3D printing looks a little rough on it, but you know, he's got the idea. I know that there's a lady out on the East Coast who's done clinics on poultry cars, and she's been working on 3D printing as well. And she had gotten the main body, but she was stymied by how to do the sides. So I don't know if that project ever got anywhere or not. So here is a model that someone scratch built, I believe, and it's pretty credible. I don't recall ever seeing these little tension things on a car, because these are not, this is not wires. That should be an open with the wood slats tipping through. But you know, here's what this model looks like. It could be an old Ambroid kit. I'm not sure, because it's not up to today's modern standards. Interesting, there's only half ladder over here, which was standard for a box car, but a poultry car, you'd have a full length ladder on both ends. So mentioned the roof walk and the ventilation. We had a long slide, etc. But here is a couple photos of, you know, clearly what they looked like. They had screens and mesh there. You certainly didn't want to step through them, but they could be opened up for a clear story ventilation. Here is another good photo shot, and this is a wood instead of a wire mesh. And so again, if you are the, you know, look, there's a notch there. If you're walking this car at night, you stepped on that notch, you were going right down through, probably break your leg. And here you can see the water tanks on these cars. So you got two poultry cars here in this, well, a whole string of them, but this one you can sort of clearly see the water tanks. These are photos taken in Pennsylvania and Scranton, I believe it is, the Lackawanna yard. Here again, you can see how these sides were hinged so they could close up to keep the air from getting out, or open them up for ventilation. So some more details. You know, I mentioned the canvas muslin curtain that they could hang. The measurements, that screen wire, you know, I'm just think of your chain link fence, an 1/8 inch diameter wire, about 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches diamond pattern, and then C channels, etc. The screens are 11 inches tall. The gap between the three screens is 3 inches. And so to do that in HO, there is some really fine wire mesh used in the chemical and water treatment industries for filtering that is come close to providing this size opening and size wire, but it's very expensive. So I don't know of anybody yet who's built a model of it. But here is a fellow by the name of Lee Turner, who's really well known for his weathering. He took, I believe this is the O scale Overland brass car, and he's just done a marvelous job of finishing it off, filling it with birds. I know some people, they've just taken a tuft of white cotton, dabbed one end a little bit with a touch of red, and maybe the other end with a touch of yellow, and stuffed the cars full if they were making a model of a poultry car. But yeah, Lee did a really nice job with this car. So color, people always ask for color. This is one of those baseball type trading cards. There was a series of them for freight cars in the 50s, but I think Topps did them. And this one, you can see it's got red ends, roof, and door. There's a cover on a Railway Age magazine that also got an artist rendition of the color, but we don't really know. There's references to green, to yellow, to reds, and even blacks, plus typically white or galvanized metal for the sides. So it's hard to tell what the actual colors were. So I thank you for your time. We got questions.
Hey, Tug,
Yes.
I'll just, on the models, Yield, Huff and Puff also did one similar to, Embride, just for in future, if you want. It's another model that it was out there. Yield, Huff and Puff did one.
You're right. I had that Kristen didn't have that in her list, and I just completely spaced it off myself. So thank you, Les. Appreciate that. So
You mentioned that in World War II, the shipment of live poultry increased. Why was that?
probably because the trucks weren't available,
Oh, okay.
and also, yeah, I don't know if they were shipping live poultry to processing facilities so they could ship dressed meat over to the soldiers overseas. So there might have been a little bit of that too, but probably more likely they couldn't get the rubber, they couldn't get the rubber for tires, gasoline for the engines, and it's just same thing with the passenger traffic. It just increased.
Okay.
But I'm good at making up answers. Ask my wife.
Hey, Doug, I got one more for you. You mentioned the first time I've heard of them, where there were caretakers cars without a caretaker. They were shipped. Do you have any information when one of those without a caretaker arrived at a
No.
site, how it would get unloaded, or you know what I'm saying?
I'm assuming the owner of the car had made arrangements for loading and unloading, and it may have been like a 24-hour process where they weren't on the car for a long, long time. I do know we have some records in some M and St. L correspondence in the late 20s where some local agent was getting chewed because he sent some cars to Minneapolis when they were needed to be loaded in Winfield, Iowa. So, I mean, these cars scattered all over, but they attended. Sometimes they just hired whoever was hanging around the depot. You want to ride the car for the next 3 days and take care of the birds?
Yep.
I'll pay you so much money. So it wasn't like there was a big union of poultry car attendants. So, I mean, they might even hire someone like, Clark or Hinkie. So.
Boy, they hired you, didn't they?
Oh yeah, I'm getting paid lots of money for doing this promo stuff. So, I did give somebody gave me a tin of these giant cookies this afternoon. So you guys, you talk among yourselves. I'm going to.
I thought it'd be Kentucky Fried Chicken.
I had sesame chicken and orange chicken for supper tonight with Chinese dinner. So yes, I had my chicken.
All right. Well, great job, Doug. Thank you very much. That was wonderful. Excellent, as I predicted. And
well, it's been a fun segue and study on top of my livestock stuff, because very few people know about poultry cars, and it's an industry that pretty much disappeared by about 1950. There were only a handful of cars running around by then. So very few people, unless they're modeling earlier, they don't have a need for a poultry car unless it's an old decrepit one sitting next to the freight depot.
Right.
Of course, Clark needs some for his layout because there was a poultry packer producer in Roland. No, you're shaking your head. No, Clark.
No.
Well, we are going to, next week, we're going to move back by an hour. We're going to go at 5:30 Central, 6:30 Eastern, in order to accommodate Jason's schedule. And he's gonna be presenting on some of the stuff that he's doing around scenery. So I'll send that announcement out, but just a heads up that that'll be an hour earlier to accommodate his schedule. And then Lester's going to be presenting the week after that on the addition to his layout. So that'll be exciting. And then we'll go from there. So we're going to make it halfway through February. before we have to have anybody else present. If you're interested in presenting, of course, all you got to do is contact me or Ron. And thanks again, Doug. That was a great presentation. I really enjoyed it. I'm sure everybody else did. A lot of great information there. So thank you very much.
Yep, happy to do it.